The night Petra Dunne saved a man's life, she was thinking about rent. That's the thing nobody tells you about survival. It doesn't look heroic. It doesn't feel heroic. It looks like a 26-year-old woman with swollen ankles and flour on her apron, doing math in her head while she refills water glasses, calculating whether she can cover February's heating bill if she picks up a Saturday branch shift. Petra had been working at Salone Moretti for 3 years by then. She knew every table, every creak in the floorboards, every draft that came through the kitchen door when Marco forgot to latch it. She knew which regulars wanted their coffee before the menu and which ones wanted to be left alone entirely. She knew the wine list better than the sommelier they'd hired and fired twice. She knew things nobody thought to ask her about, because nobody thought to ask her anything. That was the deal, unspoken and absolute. Petra was the kind of woman people looked through. She understood this about herself without bitterness, or mostly without it. She was 26, 300 pounds of her packed into black pants and a white button-down that she ironed herself every Sunday night. She had her mother's wide brown eyes and her father's stubbornness and a laugh that filled rooms when she let it out, which wasn't often at work. At work, she was furniture, useful furniture, the kind you don't notice until it's gone. She had made peace with invisibility. That's what she told herself. What she hadn't expected was that invisibility would become the most important thing she'd ever possessed. The reservation came in under a name she didn't recognize. Varro. Party of 9, corner section, specific request for the room to be cleared of other guests during the meal. Management complied without question, which told Petra everything she needed to know. You didn't clear a room for civilians. You cleared it for men who didn't need to explain themselves. She'd worked private dinners before. Quietly powerful men eating expensive food and talking in low voices about things she wasn't supposed to hear. She'd learned to be efficient and invisible in equal measure. Fill the glass, take the plate, become the wall. But when the party arrived that Thursday evening, something was different. She felt it before she saw them. A change in the air pressure of the room, almost. The bartender stood straighter. The hostess laughed too quickly at something one of them said. Even Chef Borelli, who was afraid of nothing except bad reviews, went very still when he peered through the kitchen window. The man who walked in first wasn't the largest or the loudest. He was perhaps 40, lean in a way that suggested deliberate maintenance rather than luck, with dark hair going grey at the temples and a face that had been broken and reset enough times to look lived in rather than damaged. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than Petra made in 3 months. He moved through the restaurant the way certain men move, as though the space was already his, and everyone in it was simply a guest. His name, she would learn later, was Cassian. No last name offered, none needed in the circles he moved through. He was not from New Orleans, but New Orleans had claimed him the way the city claimed all its serious men. Slowly, completely, without apology, he sat at the head of the table and ordered bourbon, neat without looking at the menu. His men arranged themselves around him like planets settling into orbit. Petra worked the table. She was good at her job. She was genuinely, quietly excellent at it, and it was one of the few spaces in her life where she allowed herself to know that. She remembered orders without writing them down. She anticipated refills. She noticed when the man at the end of the table had gone tense. Not the normal tension of powerful men in private rooms, but something sharper. And she noticed when that same man reached into his jacket pocket twice, not for a phone. She noticed these things the way she noticed everything, without letting her face change, without giving anyone reason to look at her twice. The dinner proceeded. The bourbon was poured. The food came out in courses, and Petra moved between the kitchen and the table like water finding its level. It was during the 3rd course that she saw it. She came through the swinging door from the kitchen, carrying 2 plates, and she had a clear sightline to the bar cart that had been wheeled to the far side of the table. The man she'd been watching, thick neck, rings on 3 fingers, eyes that moved too much. His back was to the room. His hand moved over one of the glasses for less than 2 seconds. Petra set the plates down in front of the wrong men. She corrected herself with a murmured apology. She moved to the cart to pour. The glass in question was crystal, heavy, monogrammed with the restaurant's crest. She could see nothing wrong with it. The bourbon in it looked like all the other bourbon. But she'd watched that hand, and she'd seen what she'd seen, and there was a moment, just a moment, where Petra Dunne stood very still inside herself and made a decision about what kind of person she was. It cost her something, that decision. She could feel the cost even as she made it. She reached for the glass. She said, without particular urgency, "Sir, I'm so sorry. I believe there's a chip on this rim. Let me replace that for you." She addressed this to the room in general, not to Cassian specifically. Kept her voice professional, faintly apologetic, the voice of a woman managing a minor inconvenience. She picked up the glass before anyone could object. She carried it to the kitchen. She poured it down the drain. Her hands were completely steady. She was proud of that later. In the moment, she was only thinking about the heating bill, which was insane, but the mind goes where it goes when the rest of you is terrified. She poured a fresh glass. She brought it back to the table. She set it at Cassian's place without ceremony and moved on to refill someone's water. Later in the evening, she couldn't have said how much later. Time had gone strange. She was clearing the appetizer plates when she realized that Cassian's eyes were on her, not the way men's eyes were sometimes on her, dismissive or worse. These eyes were the eyes of a man doing arithmetic. She felt them like a physical pressure and kept her own eyes on the plates in her hands. "Miss," he said. She stopped. "Yes, sir." There wasn't a chip in that glass. The table had gone quiet. The man with the rings had gone very still. Petra looked at Cassian directly. She'd been raised by a woman who said that the only power you ever truly owned was the ability to look someone in the eye when everything in your body wanted to look away. She thought about her mother now. "No," she said. There wasn't. The room's silence thickened into something almost textured. "Then why?" Cassian said. "Did you take it?" This was the test. She understood it as a test the way you understand a road has ended. Not because there's a sign, but because there's nothing in front of you anymore, and the next step will take you off the edge. She could have lied. Several lies presented themselves, polished and plausible. She was good at managing difficult moments. It was part of the job. But she looked at this man, at the steadiness of his gaze, at the quality of attention he was paying her, which was unlike anything she'd experienced in 3 years of being invisible, and she understood that lying would be the most dangerous thing she could do. "I watched a man put something in your drink," she said. "I didn't know what it was. I decided I didn't want to find out." Silence. Then Cassian said, "Which man?" Petra didn't point. She'd watched enough crime television to know you don't point. She said, "The one across from you, second from the left." He reached into his jacket twice before dinner. The second time, his hand came out empty. The man with the rings stood up very fast, and 2 of Cassian's other men stood up faster. And Petra took several steps backward toward the kitchen door, because her feet made this decision before her brain got there, and what happened next was not something she watched. She stood in the kitchen with her back against the cold metal shelving, and Chef Borelli staring at her, and the sounds from the dining room washing through the door, and she thought, very clearly, "I am going to need a new job." She was wrong about that, but she didn't know it yet. They kept her there for 2 hours. Not roughly. No one was rough with her, which was its own kind of disorienting. A man she hadn't seen before came into the kitchen, spoke to her quietly, asked her to wait. She sat on an overturned milk crate, and a different man brought her coffee without being asked, which struck her as the most surreal part of the entire evening. She called her roommate to say she'd be late. She did not explain why. When she was finally brought back into the dining room, most of the party was gone. Cassian sat at the table alone, jacket off now, a fresh glass of bourbon in front of him. The room had been cleared and reset with an efficiency she found faintly alarming. He looked up when she entered. "Sit down," he said. She sat across from him, which felt absurd. A waitress in an apron sitting across from a man like this at a table set for 9. She folded her hands in her lap and waited. "Your name," he said. Petra Dunne." He repeated it, not like he was confirming it, more like he was putting it somewhere he wouldn't lose it. "How long have you worked here, Petra Dunne?" 3 years, and in 3 years you've learned the room." It wasn't a question, but she answered it anyway. "Yes, you noticed Aldrich before any of my men did." He said this without inflection, which made it more striking, not less. "None of them saw what you saw. They weren't looking for it," she said, then, because she couldn't help herself. "People don't look at me. I look at them. It's been that way my whole life." She paused. "I'm sorry. You didn't ask for my—" "I asked you to sit down," he said. "I wanted to hear you talk. Keep going." She took a breath. "When you're the kind of woman people look past, you learn to see everything. It's not a skill so much as a side effect. You watch because nobody's watching you back. You learn to read rooms because you have to read rooms. Nobody's going to warn you when something's wrong. You warn yourself." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, rain had begun against the windows. She hadn't noticed when it started. "I'm going to ask you a question," he said, "and I want an honest answer. Not a safe answer. Not a smart answer. An honest one. All right. You saw a man tamper with a drink intended for someone you'd never met. Someone who, by any reasonable standard, you should have no reason to protect and several reasons to fear. Why did you do it?" Petra thought about this seriously, the way it deserved to be thought about. "I wasn't trying to protect you specifically," she said. "I saw something wrong, and I was the only one who saw it, and that made it mine to deal with. It doesn't matter who the glass belonged to." She paused. "I've spent a lot of years watching bad things happen to people because the people who could see what was happening decided it wasn't their problem. I made a decision a long time ago that I wasn't going to be one of those people. Even when it costs something." She looked at her hands. "It costs something tonight, I know that. I'm sitting here, so I know that." Cassian picked up his glass, set it back down without drinking. "What do you want?" he asked. "From life, not tonight, in general." The shift in the conversation was so abrupt she almost laughed. "That's a strange question. It's the most straightforward question I've asked you." She thought about rent and heating bills and her mother's hospital statements that she kept in a folder she tried not to open. She thought about the business degree she'd started at community college and abandoned when the money ran out, and the textbooks she still owned, still read sometimes, which she found embarrassing and had never told anyone. "I want a situation where my ability determines what happens to me," she said. "Not my appearance, not where I'm from. I want to be in a room where what I can actually do is what matters." She met his eyes. "I don't know if that's naive." "It's not naive," he said. "It's rare." He looked at her for a long moment, the evaluating look, the arithmetic look, the look she'd noticed across the room hours earlier. "I have a proposition," he said. She kept her face neutral. "I'm listening. I need someone in a position like yours, present, in rooms where I can't be present, observant, discreet, honest when honesty matters." He turned the glass slowly in his hand. "The man who tried to poison me tonight was my second in command for 11 years. He was educated, well compensated, and completely trusted. You saw through him in 40 minutes. He paused. "I'd like to understand what you see. You want to hire me. I want to retain you. There's a difference." He named a number. Petra kept her face completely still. The number was more than she made in a year. "To do what, exactly?" she asked. "Exactly what you did tonight. except deliberately and with some additional context about what you're looking at. He leaned back slightly. I'm not asking you to do anything illegal. I'm asking you to watch, to report, to tell me what you see in rooms where people have decided you're not worth noticing. She thought about the folder of hospital statements. She thought about the textbooks. There are things I won't do, she said. Tell me. I won't lie for you. I won't help you hurt someone who doesn't deserve to be hurt. And if I see something I can't live with, I reserve the right to walk away. They're not conditions, she said. They're who I am. They don't change based on the number. Something shifted in his face, not warmth exactly, but a recognition of something he'd been looking for and hadn't expected to find. He extended his hand across the table. Then we understand each other, Petra Dunne. She looked at his hand. She thought about her mother, who had worked 2 jobs and still died apologizing for the bills she was leaving behind. She thought about every room she'd walked through while people looked past her, through her, around her. She shook his hand. We understand each other, she said. She went back to the restaurant for 3 more weeks, because Cassian said it was better that way, no abrupt changes, no reasons for anyone to look at the situation and see a seam. She refilled water glasses and carried plates and stood in corners and watched people. She was very good at all of it. She had always been very good at all of it. The difference was that now someone knew. He called her twice during those 3 weeks. Short conversations, specific questions about 2 men she'd seen at separate private dinners. She told him what she'd observed. He thanked her without elaboration. On her last shift, she set down a bread basket at a table of 4 men who had no idea who she was or what she knew about them, and she understood something she hadn't been able to articulate before, that she had never been powerless. She had only been in rooms where people confused her silence for absence. She wasn't absent. She had never been absent. She'd just been waiting for someone smart enough to look. Months later, after the work she did with Cassian had shifted from one thing into something she didn't have a clean word for, after the business textbooks came off the shelf and stayed off, after she'd sat across from men in rooms she'd only ever served before and watched them underestimate her, and used that underestimation like the precise instrument it was. She told someone what had happened that night. A woman, another woman who moved in these circles, who'd looked at Petra across a table and asked her, direct and genuine, how she'd gotten there. Petra considered the question. There was a night, she said, when I was the only one paying attention, and I decided that counted for something. The woman waited for more. That's really all of it, Petra said. The rest was just keeping my eyes open and my mouth honest. She picked up her coffee. She thought about the glass, about the kitchen, about the cold metal shelving against her back while rain ran down the windows, and her hands stayed completely still. She thought about how certain things that look like disadvantages are only disadvantages if you accept someone else's definition of the game. She'd stopped accepting other people's definitions a long time ago. She just hadn't had the room to prove it. Now she did.